Rob Portman's with us now, Republican from the state of Ohio. And thank you, Senator, by the way. I want to start where we are. Obviously, your state, like many others, is impacted by the threat of a trade war and by the implementation of tariffs. So what's your view on this, the latest development today, the president identifying as a tariff man? Is that his philosophy, or is it a negotiating tactic?
I think it's both, but I think we've had a very positive week in trade. Let's be honest. We weren't sure what was going to happen with the meeting at the G20 between President Trump, President Xi, and it turned out to have set up a process. We now know who's in charge. Bob Lighthizer is going to negotiate for us. We know that the Chinese are willing to make some concessions early in terms of buying more of our product, and over the longer haul, they're going to talk about the other issues that have to be talked about, by the way, in my view, which is more the structural changes in our relationship and specifically on intellectual property. And second, Mexico signed the U.S.-Mexico Free Trade Agreement with Canada. So it's been positive. I know the markets are moving on a lot of different things, but overall, when the market, the Dow hit 26 yesterday, I think that was an indication that people kind of saw the positive. Now maybe they're seeing that it's going to be hard. It's always hard, particularly negotiating with China, but it's important that we're making progress, and I'm very pleased with what's happened in the last few days.
Yeah, trade's a complicated issue, to your point. Now, when I ask you about whether the president's identification as a tariff man is a negotiating tactic or a philosophy, you said both. You may be right. Doesn't that worry you, though, as a free trader, if that is a philosophy, a protectionist philosophy and outlook?
Well, I've seen, with regard to the NAFTA deal being revamped, that he is willing to figure out how to make a deal. He has done so also with South Korea in the last several months, which didn't get much notice, but that's positive. And now with the EU, we have the ability to take a breather and try to negotiate something. He seems to want to also negotiate agreements with Japan and England, so with the UK. So there is an opportunity here, I think, to actually make progress, even though the president may, in fact, like the idea of tariffs because it, in his view, brings more revenue in. The problem with tariffs, of course, is that when we increase tariffs on other countries, they increase them on us.
Sure.
And you end up with this escalation that leads to higher prices for the people who I represent when they're trying to buy something, and fewer exports from our farmers and our workers in Ohio. So I'm a former U.S. trade representative, as you know, and I'm not someone who believes that it ought to be just unfettered trade. I think we ought to have strict rules that ought to be enforced. But that doesn't mean that you can't have trade on a level playing field between countries. That ought to be our objective.
And as a bottom line, that idea that we're bringing in billions, isn't that in and of itself a flawed kind of definition of how tariffs work? I mean, that's basically what you're saying, right? We end up at the end of the day as consumers or as American companies paying them. The costs get passed on to us.
Yeah, it's a tax from an economic point of view.
Yeah.
But look, I get what the president is saying. He wants us to have reciprocity with other countries. So if they have high tariffs on our automobiles, for instance, his notion is, well, let's put tariffs on theirs and then get both of us to lower those tariffs. That's a good thing. And I think that's what we've seen with regard to some of these negotiations where the president's taken a tougher position, but ultimately with the objective of getting tariffs down for both parties, which frankly helps our exporters because we do have the ability here in America now to make things with our new tax legislation, the new regulatory reforms that are in place, things that he promoted. It's made America a better place to do business, and it's made America a better place specifically to manufacture something to export it abroad.
The other place, Senator, where he's been aggressive recently, at least, is on the side of the automakers, really going after GM after that announcement about jobs being cut and plants being closed. I know you're going to meet with Mary Barra, the General Motors Chief Executive Officer, I believe tomorrow. What's the goal from your point of view of that particular meeting? What would you like to accomplish?
Well, my goal is very similar to what it's been really for the last several months, because you recall they shut down one shift and then another shift. Now we have one shift left at the Lordstown plant in Ohio. This is a huge plant that produces the Cruise vehicle. I understand that the Cruise is not selling well. That's a market condition. What I don't understand is why this plant, which has been an award-winning plant, got a J.D. Power Award just this year, in fact, for being effective, competitive, why this plant can't continue to be used for other product. And so that's what I'm talking to them about. Not let's save the Cruise, that's up to the consumer, okay, but let's bring in another product that can be made there. Specifically, General Motors, as you know, is talking about making over 20 new electric vehicles just in the next 5 years.
Do you have reason to believe that she might be willing to bend on that, that you might be able to make progress on that front?
We'll see. We'll see. She's as she's told me, she's very hesitant to raise expectations that can't be met, but she's also said that she will keep an open mind, and that's what I've been counting on, is that We've got a great workforce there, a great facility, great asset, huge community support. And working together with state and local officials, my hope is that the federal government can help her to make the right decision, which is to bring an electric vehicle to Ohio.
How does the federal government help, Senator? As a Republican, I would think you wouldn't be the first one lining up. Perhaps your colleague in the Senate in Ohio, Sherrod Brown, as a Democrat, would have a different view on this, but I would assume you wouldn't be necessarily predisposed to be in favor of more subsidies or even tax breaks for these companies. So how does the federal government help?
We have already helped General Motors in a huge way, and by the way, we've also helped other U.S. manufacturers. We have lowered the corporate tax rate to make our companies competitive so they'll make things here. We have provided for immediate expensing, which is exactly what you need to do when you revamp a plant for another product. We have now the most competitive tax structure in those two areas of any of our competitors. Mexico has a 30% tax rate, as an example.
So there's nothing additional.
21%.
Nothing additional.
Well, we also have an electric vehicle credit that's very important to General Motors. And, we can go kind of either way on that as to whether we continue to help companies that are trying to compete with China and others. China's once again trying to corner the market on another product. They make about half the electric vehicles now that are sold around the world. They've decided to make that a priority for them. We would need to be sure that America continues to be on the cutting edge of innovation and invention on electric vehicles. And so I think there are ways the federal government can help. It's not directly in terms of tax abatements and so on that the states or local governments can do, but we've created an environment for success. And that's exactly what General Motors ought to be taking advantage of by investing more in America.
Senator Portman, good to see you. Thank you, sir, for coming on today.
Thanks, Connor. Thanks for having me on.
We're going